Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the beginner's guide. Before we start chapter 2, at the end of the last chapter, we stepped into a laser beam and a glitch caused you to float up in the sky. I wanted to talk about that a little bit more since I thought about it a little bit more and point out that if you were at a low level programmer and you had programmed all of the XYZ positional data in a character, there's really no way that you would have that bug without knowing where that bug is coming from. Now, I could never know unless I actually saw the code for the game, but I would expect what had happened there is that there was, on the laser beam, there was a little platform on the bottom, and to keep your feet from clipping through the platform, even though you can't really look down at your feet, it probably has a whatever engine, whatever code that he is using and relying on to make the game. There is actual texture there, actual programming there that raised the character up a little bit, that gave him some forward momentum. Why that forward momentum didn't immediately fling you upward into the air would be questionable, but that could be a possible reason. Another possibility is that if the particle physics laser beam actually had some momentum where it pushed objects upward, that could be the effect too that's causing it. But you would definitely have at least a couple of things that you could look at immediately to try and prevent that from happening. And almost certainly, if you had programmed the game correctly in the first place, so your feet would just clip through the bottom part of the laser beam, which you might as well do if you're not showing the people the feet anyways, or B, making the particle lightning not have any kind of physics attached to it, so it wouldn't affect characters or other objects. That would be very easy. Notably, even if you couldn't figure out the issue there, almost every finished game has specific rules to try to keep players from clipping out of the game. Small demos like these, you probably wouldn't implement that, but it tends to be a case that if you're in a no-go zone, as they often are getting labeled, that it will push the player back towards the actual level. So if his hand or head got clipped through the ceiling, it would just slowly try to nudge it. Sometimes, quite hilariously, the further you clip into a no-go zone outside of the level, the more quickly and forcefully it is programmed to throw you back in, which potentially can fling you even further in the opposite direction. Or you could just have the player die randomly, which that's no fun, certainly, to do it that way. But yeah, you very rarely can just clip through an area and just continuously go in an area. Even if you are trying to speedrun and clip through a wall, you tend to have to follow very specific rules unique to that game. And it's interesting, and I would definitely recommend checking out some of those speedruns, like Metroid Prime speedruns. There's a lot of clipping I've seen in some of those where you get outside of the levels and are walking on the rooftop of the ceiling. Let's continue. The past was behind her. Interesting. I can't move.
Yep. In this game, you can only walk backwards.
Interesting. Already we're starting to see these games are weird experiments in an attempt to be artsy instead of being actually good. Now apparently you'll get lighting off these edges, but you won't fall downward off of them. Seems like they've made the music play backwards too. Again though, this really feels like this is just either a source engine or a Unity store asset flip. I don't really believe if these are even real games that were actually made by a young new programmer. That I don't believe he made these textures, and I don't believe he made this texture or these bricks. And if anything, this is a step back from his previous creation.
So it's a short and relatively minimalist experiment combining motion and narrative. It is less advanced than the previous game, but actually it seems to be more focused, more complete. Code is trying to give it a unique voice rather than simply basing it on a pre-existing trope.
Yeah. It's far too artsy-fartsy for somebody trying to be new at making video games. Because this, once again, is something where if you tried to put this in front of somebody and say, here, play this game, as soon as they press forward and can't walk forward, they're going to say, this game is broken, and give up. And even if they played all the way through, it's still making an artsy game, not a game that sells. So why would you hire a game programmer that's making games that will be niche and artsy but won't really sell? Video games are in this odd position where they are both a commercial product and a piece of art. And very often the art has to be compromised and not as good as you'd like it to be in favor of making it a commercial product and just following the tropes and doing what is expected of you. I wonder here if the angle is slightly shifting. If the future is always behind her, how will she find strength? Here they're talking about a female character. Yeah, since this is a game that has been warned off as being very sad, it's going to be similar to that story, That Dragon Cancer. And speaking of artsy games, That Dragon Cancer is certainly an artsy story that the creator then came out and said they were upset that people were doing Let's Plays around it and monetizing and getting ad revenue from their artsy story of a child potentially dying of cancer. But their complaints fall apart on the first bit of critical thinking in the fact that That Dragon Cancer as a game is also being sold on Steam. So, to confront it.
It's a short little thought, it says what it wants to say, and then it ends. Didn't need anything more than that. Which to me is why it works, because it gets out quick. Okay,
I don't think that works at all. I think that's terrible. There's a lot of Java, like HTML, Java, not JavaScript, but Java, the programming language, before they finally shut down Java for being just a huge security risk because it was not getting supported and updated. There's a lot of Java games, though, that were put online that were way better than that. And I'm just not seeing anything special here. So I can't go backwards, and there's just an area of lighting that spreads forward on this path. Again, this just feels like asset flips. And I guess if you didn't know what asset flips are, if you didn't know that there were people out there, even when these games theoretically would have been made, that were selling just a signpost, just a piece of wood, that there were artists out there that were really capable of selling their art skills without having to learn how to program full games, you might think that this is all brand new stuff. Even if this was all brand new stuff, then it really just paints that Coda is an artist that can do some 3D modeling and texturing and is wasting his time or her time. Maybe Coda is a girl. Coda, very possible, is a girl. But yeah, Coda's wasting their time putting it in an interactive environment when really they could have been on something
And
like...
that's it. Okay, the meaning of this game won't be clear just yet. Please be patient with me for a few more games, and I promise you'll see what makes it interesting.
Yeah, that seems ridiculous.
Oftentimes, Coda would put bizarre titles like this one at the start of his games. I wish I'd known him at the time that he was making these early games. He would really only talk to me about his work as he was making it. Once he stopped work on a game, like, that was it. It was dead to him. And I don't agree with that at all, but what are you gonna do?
Well, he's saying Coda is a male. He's using his. I don't think I quite saw what the title was there, as I was being blinded and distracted by how incredibly short.
I know it's tempting, but there's actually nothing over here. Sorry.
Can't jump off the edge. There's just nothing here. And if anything, this is a step back, because instead of delving deeper into buying assets, he has just made a solid colored gray polygons. His games are getting worse, not better. I suppose it is a possibility that the narrator was in some kind of homosexual relationship / dating situation with Coda, or just very intense, deep friendship, bromance with Coda. That is another possibility, certainly. Camera seems like it's kind of tilted, or you're having just a general parallax issue as you're going up, and I'm walking slower and slower.
Once you've been slowed to an absolute crawl, the door at the top of the stairs opens. So why, if Coda's not showing these games to anyone, why bother opening the door at all? Well, to show you, I'm modifying the game here so that when you press the use key on your gamepad, it'll bring you back up to full speed so you can enter the door for yourself.
Yeah, this just seems ridiculous. Stand X to stare at a beer for 3 hours. A stranger appears. A button to press to stop.
A room that's warm and nice and filled with little ideas for
Push you
games.
to surrender your gate.
Coda would often tell me that he didn't mind if people thought of him as cold or distant. He said that he knew that he was actually a vibrant and compassionate person, but that it takes time to really see that.
Notice how the ideas
It
are
can be a very slow
flying
climb to get
away
there.
from you. And seeing it fly like that out of the position wherever you're standing, frankly, is more programming than everything else. And that just gives me more of a feeling that all of these games are fake and this whole narrative is fake. That somebody wanted to tell a story and that the narrator didn't want to really bother with the animating and the programming so much. So he's created this contrived narrative of a bad programmer or a young programmer making bad games, so that the actual experience in the beginner's guide is also ugly and cheap and low effort. Yeah, it's not until you get to this point where it starts to feel like Coda might be making progress again. Again, these are just pre-made textures. I've almost certainly seen these walls in other games before. Inherently, I don't think Coda, even if Coda actually does exist, is learning from his experiences to bounce around in so many different ways. He almost feels like he might be doing game jams or something, where he's working just on the weekend to program
well, this is
a
new
game.
for Coda. It's an actual puzzle. Go ahead and see if you can solve it. Don't forget that solution, because we're going to see this puzzle again soon. We're going to see it a lot.
Then you've got like these 3 holes again. The music here, you almost have to assume is either pre-bought or it has been added for the beginner's guide, because I'd almost have to assume that the music in this game, if this game actually did exist previously, would be non-existent. At a certain level, I almost wish this narrative was just something I went more blindly into, and that this was just somebody talking about somebody and their first efforts at making games, and that there wasn't a bigger twist to it than that.
So that seems to be it, right? You walk down a corridor, you solve a puzzle, you get to the end. Simple enough. Alright, now I'm going to modify the game again, so that when you press the Use key on your gamepad, it'll remove all of the walls from this room.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a bunch of random...
There was more to it than we had any way of knowing. I actually find it funny that this game comes after the Stairs game, since they essentially convey the opposite idea. So, in the Stairs game, a dull exterior concealed a rich interior. And then, in this level, a dull interior hides this fantastic outer world. Either way, I think that the point is the same, is that most of the time you don't get to know what you're missing, or even that you're missing anything. That's not your role as a player. So if your role here is not to understand, then what is it?
Like, inherently, if you had a level like that and it's shipped that way, it's just because you made a bunch of different layouts, perhaps even programmed the computer to procedurally make a bunch of layouts, and then moved it out of the way when you threw something away, which does seem to be in line with Coda, just deleting things and not like properly utilizing everything. So we're back to this game now, and I guess the goals were not to understand, or the goal is that we're going to hit Y and or hit the use button on the controller and see what is around here when the lighting is changed. This just doesn't work as a game though, because you're now exiting. If you are actively hiding secrets that can only be found by cheating or changing the code, so few people are going to find it that it once again becomes this weird piece of art and not a consumable item that can be sold to even a niche audience that you would need to be considered successful.
Aha. So, this, combined with the entering game from earlier, tells us that Coda believes his games are connected somehow. It could even be that the stairs game and the puzzle game are literally connected in between this and the entering game. There's a bigger picture that all of his games are meant to play a role in, some larger meaning that we won't be able to grasp until we've seen all of them. And once we have, we can step back and start to understand what exactly that bigger picture is.
Yeah, this sounds incredibly contrived. It definitely feels more like Coda is just putting garbage games on or making garbage games. At the very least, it doesn't even really matter if that's if there is a secret hidden meaning that's extra, because at the end of the day, if you get dismissed as a creator, as an artist, because your message was too deeply buried and the deeper meaning is just never found, well, then you've failed to communicate. And art, in part, has to communicate something. It has to create an intrigue and
Let's
an
talk
interest.
about video game development for a second. Every video game runs on what's called an engine, which determines what the game can and cannot do. So in other words, the engine is a set of tools for game development.
Yeah, it feels like this was probably where the game should have
Coda
started.
is using an engine called Source. Like all engines, Source has certain things that it does well, and it has certain things that it does poorly. One of the things that it does very well is boxy linear corridors. That's why so many of Coda's games are set in these large, flat, empty rooms, is just because he's working with what the engine does well. The tools available to the creator shape what kinds of creative work they're going to end up making. You might consider paying attention to the architecture in Coda's games to notice how they seem to stem from an engine that's very good at producing linear, boxy corridors.
Using Source Engine is a mistake, certainly nowadays, but even then, because the Source Engine is really just built around making Half-Life, Half-Life 2. The Steam is owned by the creators of the Source Engine, Valve, and they've been working on making a Source Engine 2 for a very long time and failing pretty terribly at actually releasing a Source 2 engine. But even at that, the Source Engine is overly focused on making games like Half-Life, which are first-person shooters in boxy, narrow corridors, like he says. But they also have a focus on being groundbreaking around using physics. So you have the gravity gun in Half-Life, you have the portal gun in the Portal series. All of those work or have been programmed. The Source Engine has been programmed to work fairly well with those extra physics that honestly are probably not as optimized as what something like the Unreal Engine could do now. You are far better off using the Unreal Engine these days. It would be laughably stupid to try to do anything in the Source Engine. But it wouldn't have been around this time frame to do Source Engine stuff, because Half-Life 1 was groundbreaking. This level of low polygon shapes at the time would have been potentially groundbreaking. Gary's mod certainly is very notable for taking the power of the Source Engine and making something that people play a lot with. If the story told me that actually all of this was actually Gary's mod on top of the Source Engine, that might even explain why there's even less of a game here. But when you look at Half-Life, when you look at Portal, which is probably the weirdest Source Engine game, when you look at Gary's mod, when you look at Counter-Strike Go, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, all of those games are very narrow about being first-person shooters or third-person shooters, and they do not try to do anything different. So inherently, just by starting to pigeonhole yourself into using the source engine, you're pigeonholing yourself to only making a certain kind of game. And it is oddly a certain kind of game that Coda seems uninterested in making. So he would have done way better to just start over. He probably should have made Java games and put those Java games online as much smaller projects, much easier to create projects. On a certain level, it feels like in a post-Frog Fractions world, it definitely feels like this game is trying to be like Frog Fractions in the sense that that was very avant-garde and artsy. Didn't hit anything on the way down at all there, did I? But even Frog Fractions as a concept actually had a very consistent, heavy gameplay mechanic to start off with, and actually looked and played like a video game a lot more than any of these games do. Interesting little walls to, I think, keep you from falling down and forcing you to spiral all the way around. There's this glass barrier. And if this is just pre-made textures that came with the source engine, that would make a lot of sense too. There's actually not as many assets to flip, I would say, for source engine games compared to going to like a Unity asset store or an Unreal asset store, because there's most of the assets that you would use for a source engine thing would have been textures and models of things that had been made by Valve themselves, making Half-Life and future games. In fact, this looks very similar to a sequence in Half-Life. I like the bright white. Yeah. I feel like this really should have been the first chapter, and everything before then should have perhaps come later. And I'm getting some very deep bass pounding. Let me just make sure that that's actually coming from the game. Yeah. Very, very deep bass. And we're getting herded like cattle, it seems, into what could be a jail cell or prison. Guess we didn't have the ability.
This prison, funny enough, in Coda's original design, the doors stayed shut for a full hour before letting you go. If you don't mind, I think we're gonna skip that.
Like, even
this is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable, whether it means anything if no one can get through it. And I would always defend that, you know, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible? And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
It's crazy for the narrator of the game, unless the idea is the narrator of the game is not actually the creator of these games, to make us go through what is effectively a walking simulator here and not really play a playable game, and then claim that he's all about games should be playable, because we're not playing here, we're walking and pressing A on the controller every now and then to interact, but hardly a game there. And games are supposed to be systems of entertainment and joy and interaction. They're not light switches. Making a game out of flipping a light switch on and off is not a game in my book, as far as my narrow definition, more narrow definition of what video games should be. And you can pretty much grab any interpretation you want from a lot of this, that Coda feels trapped or incapable of freeing himself. It's very possible here that I just will stupidly even miss some more subtle emotional implications of these games in the games being potentially dark, or you being put in the prison. If it's blatantly obvious, I'll probably get the idea, but it's also very possible that I would totally miss something until the last second if it doesn't spell it out particularly clearly. I wouldn't say I am the most empathic person in the world as far as empathizing with other people. We just keep on seeing these same three holes. Which, seeing that one element get repeated over and over again definitely gives it some special meaning.
It's the puzzle again, with the exact same solution as the last time.
I can't complain, though, about Coda learning. Like, that's not a bad thing for him to take an idea. If you step away from calling this an actual
game, there's still no
game,
clear indication of what makes this puzzle so special that Coda is going to return to it over and over. But I promise I'll share with you my interpretation very shortly.
like, copying pasting things that work is a great way as a programmer to get better, to make each game a little bit better, particularly when you're not spoiling the surprise on games because you're not actually putting them out to be seen. Like, again, I could try to interpret something like that, like sometimes the only way out is to close the door on yourself. But why even bother trying to interpret that when this story is going to try and pull you by the nose towards some bigger narrative? This level is also significantly longer than all the previous games up until this point. Way longer and way more varied. And still, it still feels weird. You there, did you come from
Coda
above?
begins using a kind of dialogue system that he fashioned out of the engine's chat capabilities. Use the buttons on your gamepad to respond.
So I had to calibrate the X, Y, and B buttons on an Xbox controller to it. So it says, you there, did you come from above, up above what was up there? Yes, there was a world stamp with whiteness. Yes, there was an enormous prison. I spent hours on this. Yes, there was these floating colored blocks. Yeah, Remember, we started this game around a restaurant, and then we went down the stairs. A world stamped in whiteness implies that your outlook and what you remember of the experience is bright, maybe good, maybe hopeful, or just empty. An enormous prison I spent hours in is not accurate. Even if we had spent 1 hour in there, it wouldn't have been hours. Those floating colored blocks, were they that colored, or were they mostly black and white? I think I would pick colored blocks, because I don't know if we really saw a world of whiteness, or came from a world stamped with whiteness so much. Yeah, and at a certain level, you probably can't get back up past the floating blocks anyways, so why promise a world stamped in whiteness when they wouldn't see that? So I'm going to pick number 3. The world above. You've been there? Now this is important. Did you have to get through a puzzle with 2 doors and switches? Yes, I did. That literally is the last thing I did before coming here. No, I don't remember having to go through any puzzle. I prefer not to tell you. After all, we've only just met. Let's go with number 1 with yes. Again, perfect. Now, please, tell us how you solved it. Tell us the solution. Tell us how to get to the other side. I don't remember how I solved it. I'm trying to remember, but I can't. There's really no reason why that would even be a prompt. I didn't solve it if someone else let me in. Trust me, you don't want to go over there. I don't know if you can undo it. Though, like, it's a one-way door, as it seems. So you could try to be kind and lie and say, trust me, you don't want to go over there, but that's really assuming their own desires. I could lie and say I didn't solve it, someone else let me in. I don't remember how I solved it. I'm trying to remember, but I can't. That's also a lie. There's really no true answer here, and that's the problem with a lot of prompts. Which, maybe that is the narrative. It might be that the lock or the switch on 2 sides of the door is an indication that Coda is being locked in and abused by somebody. I guess I'll pick I didn't solve it, someone else let me in. You didn't solve it, so you've learned nothing. You cannot help us escape this prison. You're not the one I need. Surely there will be someone else. I mean, that seems fairly on the nose as far as this being a prison as much as the previous area being a prison. So yeah, it definitely seems like we are Coda is doing variations on a theme as far as prison in this one level. We are now at chapter 7 down, so I was right in my speculation that we were going to go through chapters like crazy. It seems like we've probably gone through more chapters than even games at this point, and it may very well be that this prison level is one of the most lengthy of the games that we see because they can't all get longer and longer. They could, but then we're not going to see that many more. And arguably, if the beginner's guide had just been, here's a masterclass at looking at someone's early game development and what they learned from it and what they should have learned from it and how they could have done this better, I probably would enjoy that narrative a lot more. To have somebody just retroactively look at the things they've created in the past and talk about what they've learned. Even mainstream AAA game developers, though, do not do that. They don't go back and do a retrospective on their previous game development. And if anything, they kind of don't learn anything anyways, because they're always moving forward to the next idea and the next game and the next concept. And they're always just working to make the next thing. Even if there are some levels of iteration in which games get better, the game developers don't realize as so much that they're getting better at making games. Inherently, though, we've seen a lot of sequels that are either put in the hands of someone completely different, Bioshock 2 compared to like Bioshock 1, and then by the time you have the makers of Bioshock 1 back making a Bioshock game, they make Bioshock Infinite, which is a very different experience, and arguably as a game, I don't think as good of an experience as Bioshock 1. It may be slightly better story, but I don't think it's a better interaction game. And if you were to ask Ken Levine in particular, the maker of Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite, what he learned between there, he might spout off some nonsense that's not really useful or educational in any way, but I doubt he would actually have any objective insight or non-objective insight in any way, as far as this is how I programmed things better or this is how I animated things better. We are dangerously getting to the point where you have engine makers and programmers improving the engines as far as lighting and physics and just AI and in between animation, and then you're having game creators that are becoming much more just the surface level topping creators of games that are putting in the final textures and the voice acting and the writing, and all of those things have to work together though. But I don't know if games are particularly getting better about actually running smoother or being better representations of reality. We may have plateaued at that point. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.